So before I start trying to get the sides of the tip to be flush with the ferrule, you realize that the Longasi tips come square. That's for quality purposes. They want to be able to keep as much of that leather fresh on the inside and not be affected by external environments. So they keep it square, but it's really hard to turn the tip when it's square. So I put the shaft tip down flush on the surface, and I just use my box cutter knife and I just trim off the edges, basically making it as square as I can, as round as I can. Just a really easy process, but you know, having those couple millimeters extra leather and trying to turn it down is a lot more work than. So just cut off the 4 edges. And that's what I end up with. See, it's a lot closer to being round, and you don't have that much leather to take out. So that's a pretty important step, especially if you're turning this on a lathe. You know, imagine having that square tip turning, and if you usually use a bit to trim the sides, the amount of pressure that, you know, it just hits every time it hits the bit, it's enough to kind of tear the leather out or weaken that glue between the layers. So I highly recommend that you trim the sides, at least the edges, off a little bit before you turn it on the lathe. And I just kind of try to get as much of the leather out so I don't have to do too much work, you know, trying to get it flush to the edges of the ferrule. But I'm about close to where I want to be, and that's where the Kiridashi knife comes in. You see it's kind of shaped weird, but that's perfect to just kind of cut the sides of the tip like you're peeling an apple. And you'll see why I love this knife so much. And it's 20 bucks, 30 bucks on Amazon. They're handmade in Japan, and they're sharp. So you lay it flat, push upwards, and you don't have to put too much pressure. All I'm doing at this point is I'm just turning the shaft with my fingers. That's all I'm doing, turning the shaft. I just lay my knife right there and I turn the shaft. You see how it's like almost like cutting an apple? See, if you had a couple more millimeters of leather to take out, this process would be a lot harder. But because I was able to take most of it out, it's a lot easier right now. And I just keep doing this, keep turning until you get all the way as close to the top of the tip. And then we'll start, you know, sanding the sides of the tip to make it look a little nicer. I mean, always nice to have a tip that looks nice. See, this is not a hard process, is it? I mean, with this Kiridashi knife, it's always easy. And sometimes you'll see, look at this edge. There isn't a lot of leather, not a lot of leather, but you'll hit a point like this where there's a lot of leather to be cut off, and you'll see that it's kind of hard to get into it. Don't be afraid to go back to your box cutter knife and just shave off a little more so that your Kiridashi knife doesn't have to do that much of the work. See, that's all I took off. That's all I took off, but that's gonna make it a lot easier from here on. Same thing, I'm hitting a snag again over here. Let's see if I can take a little bit more of the leather out. The last thing you want to do when you're doing this is go inwards this way or just cut off too much. You don't want to lean your blade on the ferrule to cut straight down, because then it's going to make that area flat, and you will never ever get that tip to be round again when you're trying to sand it and make it look nice. So don't ever do that. Just take off a little bit, but leave a little bit of buffer to take off with the Kiridashi knife. And usually by the time you're at the top 2 layers ish, you know, if you want to stop right there, that is fine, because you're going to be shaping the tip, and those top 2 layers are going to be taken away anyways, so you don't have to really trim the sides all the way through. But just to show you guys how how round or how close to perfect this knife can get you. I will try to trim as much as I can, and then I'll show you a close-up against a white background just to show you that this knife pretty much does all the work for me. This step without this knife about 7 years ago took me about 40 minutes just to get the edges, the sides of the tip kind of flush to the ferrule. But now it takes me, you know, as you can see, it takes me minutes, less than 10 minutes for sure. And we're not going for perfection right here, right? I mean, it's gonna be close to round, but the surface is gonna be a little rough. It's not gonna be perfect. But let's see if I can show you on a white background. I'm gonna focus in. There we go. So just look at the line to see how close it is to being almost perfect. And like I said, we're not going for perfection just yet. We will have to use the knife and go through it with a little more detail just one more time before we sand it. So this is really close to being perfect right now. So I start back from the bottom, but this time I'm gonna put just a little more pressure so that I'm gonna make that edges as close to being perfectly round and flush to the ferrule as possible. As you can see, I'm really taking off really small little bits and pieces of the leather, because those are just the minor imperfections that we saw when I was showing you a close-up. That's all I'm doing, just going a little firmer, but see how my thumb is pushing flat on the blade so that I'm not going in at an angle, you know. That's all I'm doing. I just keep turning the shaft. You can go over the same spots over and over again if you feel like you're hitting a spot that is kind of higher than the rest. But all right, we're very close to where we want to be. Just final check again. Just one more time. Pretty close. Pretty close. I've got one small bit high point over here on the black layers. Get that out. There we go. Okay. So this is where, I mean, at this point, you've already done a lot better than a lot of people who put the tips on by hand. I mean, it's round and it's flush. And this is where I like to put a painter's tape again, as close to the edge of the ferrule. I do this because I want to sand the sides of the tip, right? 320, 400, 800. If you want, you can go all the way up to 1005, but I don't want to be sanding the ferrule because I don't need a toothpick in 5 years. So start with the 320. I fold it up, and I'll change the angle to show you how I do this. Ooh. Let me see if I can get a better angle. I've got a very wimpy phone holder, so see if I can get it to focus right there. Okay, awesome. Sandpaper, you got that tape protecting the ferrule. I put it right at the edge, and then I hold it with my thumb and my index finger. Same thing, shaft is resting on my chair. My thumb and index finger is kind of pinching on that sandpaper, and I just twist. It's like your fingers become the lathe turning the shaft. Yep, you see it. And you just keep twisting. And you realize it gets dirty, find a new spot, move it a little bit, do the same thing again. So basically with 320s, you're looking for major imperfections on the surface. If there's like a knife, you know, mark, a scuff mark or whatnot, you want to take those out. It's not going to be 100% smooth with a 320, so don't worry, right? I want to do that a little more. Still not where I want it to be. So 320 again. Just take a little more of the surface out. Then now I'm going to move on to the 400. Same process, same method. But this one's going to take off a little more finer grit, so it will look a little better. Right, you don't have to do too much of the 400. It's pretty close to the 320 grit, and the 800's where it really gets smooth. Keep in mind, I still haven't shaped the tip yet, so the top 2 layers of the tip is gonna look ugly as it is right now, but I'm not too worried about it. What I'm really worried about is the bottom 3/4 of the tip and getting those surface smooth, because that first 2 layers, 3 layers of the tip, we're gonna shape it and they're gonna be gone anyways. Right, at this point, let me see if I can show you a close-up. It's a lot closer to the final product that I want. Let me see if I can get it to zoom. There we go. You see, it's a lot better now. We're still gonna put a layer of wax on it and burnish it, and it will look awesome, trust me. But at this point, what we can do is we can shape it and then burnish it, or we can burnish it and then shape it. It doesn't matter, it's either way. But the purpose of this painter's tape is done. It's already surface purpose. And what I'll do right now is I'm gonna put a little bit of wax and show you once I burnish it, you know, and how that looks. So, wax. I just used the Q wax just because I had some. I don't really think it matters what wax you use. Just take a little bit of wax, put it on the edges, you know, just rub it in a little bit. Just give it a good turn. And you'll see that the tip's already changed colors. It's a little darker now. And then I use a piece of leather burnisher. So this leather burnisher is the Tiger leather burnisher. I think it was $5 from Tiger. And this is how I burnish my tip. Pretty much I use my legs as just a lathe. And all I do is I just roll my shaft up and down, just up and down. I've got the leather. I'm gonna hold it on tight where the tip is, right? I'm just gonna roll this up and down while I hold on to this. You don't wanna do it too much at a time because you don't want the heat to build up. If so, sometimes some tips will start delaminating. If you have some, if you're using some types of glue, what happens is the glue will really weaken when the heat builds up. You need some kind of heat, a little bit of heat, so that the sides of the tip kind of burnishes up real smooth and nice, but not too much. At this point, let me see if I can show you a close-up. The sides of the tip gets a lot better. Looks a lot better because it's all burnished up. It will start having a shine. Trust me, this is not really close to what I want it to be. And you can get a lot better results if you're a little more, you know, if you spend a little more time going through the 320s and 400 and 800. But I mean, by the time we start playing and a week in, it's not gonna look shiny and all anyways. So I'm good with this. Now let me show you how I shape the tip. So basically I just put the shaft on a hard surface. I have a towel here so that I don't put any dings in the joint. If you have a joint protector, please use it. I just never had one. I just leave it there, and I've got that metal Tweeden shaper. And I'm turning the shaft with my up and down motion so that I don't shape one side of the tip too much. This is tedious. It is the most tedious process during a tip change because you're trying to shape the leather. If this is your first time, I would suggest going slow. Sometimes what have happened in the past is I bring it down too much and I slip, and that metal kind of scratches that ferrule really bad. Had that happen before. So just go slow. I'm just really used to the process, so I go a little faster. Obviously, if you have a lathe, this process takes you seconds. I unfortunately don't have the lathe, so see that really small piece of that logo still being there? Let me just focus in real quick. Yeah, I mean the tip is almost at a dime shape now, but I still have that little piece of that top layer remaining there. You really want to shape it so that the first layer of that tip is gone. That first layer has been pretty much compromised by the external environments. So that first layer of tip, if you don't take it out, a lot of times some tips will play a lot firmer than what they're supposed to because that first layer is kind of dried out. And there we go. It's all shaped up, round, flush. Let's see if I can put a background to it. Round, flush, and shaped up. If you really want that side of the tip to shine, one more thing you can do is wet sanding. Some people use spit, some people use a little bit of water, but the idea is to introduce a little bit of moisture to the side of the tip before you sand it or buff it so that it kind of smoothens out a little bit. And like I said, you can use 1500 grit when you do wet sanding. At this point, at 1500 grit, you know, minimal impact to your ferrule, so I don't use a painter's tape to protect the ferrule with 1500 grit, and I'm not sanding it too much anyways. But let me see if I can burnish it one more time real quick. Same process as before on my legs. And finished product right there. Just take note of that edges. I mean, you can get it pretty close to being perfectly round, flush to the ferrule with that Kiridashi knife. So that's my process of changing a tip. I mean, as you can see, it took me about 20-25 minutes. It could have taken lesser if I, but I mean, it's a plus minus thing. But if you don't have a lathe, that Kiridashi knife really helps. And hopefully this video helped you kind of just to show you how I do my tips. I'm not saying this is the right way or this is the only way. I'm just introducing how I do it. All right, thanks.